welcome back to another episode of Lifesight AI, the podcast series. And this podcast episode will dovetail really nicely with the episode from 2 weeks ago with Ben Panther at Blackford Analysis. So if you haven't already listened to that one, I urge you to go and listen to that one as well. But today we have the honor of being joined by Jeroen van Duffelen from Aidence, who is the Chief Business Strategy Officer. And I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, as close as possible. But welcome along to the podcast. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you, Nick.
So just for people who aren't familiar with your work and the work of Aidence, just give everybody an introduction quite quickly into sort of what you do at Aidence and what your role is, and sort of as a co-founder as well.
Okay, yeah. So at Aidence, a company that we started in late 2015, we're developing AI-enabled software solutions for the medical field. And we initially started developing applications where we use deep learning and machine learning for automated analysis of medical images, with the purpose to basically automate tasks for radiologists and output reports that they could use for their final diagnostic reporting about the medical image that they had to review. So we started in 2016 exploring several concepts in this space, looking at MR imaging, X-ray imaging, and we ended up with CT chest imaging. What we quickly found out is that you need to focus on doing one thing very well and not build a broad platform with all kinds of applications that have sort of little depth and thereby little value. So what we've developed is a first solution initially for the automated detection of pulmonary nodules, which are very small spots in the lungs that could be a sign of early stage lung cancer. And the reason why we developed this was that during our first validation of this product, or the different concepts basically that we looked at, is that there was a clear recognition of a certain frustration and also a recognition of the errors that were made in this particular field. So there were radiologists who said, I have to find those dots and I have to measure them and I have to look at previous scans if those small spots are there as well, and then I have to see if they're growing or not. And that's a task that's pretty time consuming and tedious for humans. So if an AI software solution could help facilitate that part, that was interesting to them. So that's in 2016 when we said, okay, we're gonna put the other ideas that we're working on in the fridge, and we're gonna work on this solution. So it took us roughly 3 years from a company of basically 3-4 people in 2016 all the way to today, 40 plus people, to develop that solution, clinically certify it, and then put it in the market. So in 2019, when we thought we were ready to put it into the market, we figured out that the medical sort of IT domain or space is very complex. So it took us another year to actually build a platform so we could connect it to the market and actually offer it to radiologists. So by the end of 2019, we actually started selling the first solutions to our early customers. And now recently, we started to deploy this to very big hospital networks, among others in the UK, but also throughout Europe. And hopefully soon there will be some very interesting announcements that we can do about European-wide deployments that we're gonna start working on.
Yeah.
And your other question about what my role is within the company. So I was one of the co-founders in the background in software engineering. So we didn't know anything about medical when we started this company. So the funny example I always use when starting Aidence is we actually had a computer in front of us with Google, and then we picked up the phone and started calling radiologists and radiology companies to figure out what the potential opportunities were in this space. And when they started to talk about all kinds of medical definitions and terms, then we were like, okay, I don't know what this person is talking about. Let's quickly Google it. So then we were, okay, yeah, we understand. And then quickly Googling the other thing you were talking about. Yeah. And that's how this actually started.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you had no knowledge or ideas. So why did you pick medical then? Because you could have picked in 2016, 2015, 2014, probably when you were thinking about ideas, right? There's loads of things. AI was a sexy term around then, especially within imaging. You could have done robotics, self-driving cars. You could have worked in probably insurance or anything. Why medical?
So we actually looked at things like insurance as well. My co-founder Mark Jan, he looked at applications in geo data, so using imagery from satellites, etc. But we found the domain very interesting, as in challenging. You know, can you do something with computers for the human good, so to speak? And I actually saw a lot of developments in my previous job in this space. So I ran a business incubator in the academic centers in Amsterdam, where we had 15 academic centers participating in a business incubator, and there were a lot of developments from the medical academic centers in data analysis, big data. You know, those were the big hyped up terms back then, but nothing really going out of the research sort of stages into the market. And that's where I was like, okay, let's try and do this, because there seems to be some interest, and let's figure out if we can build a company around that. So we explored that, and my role in that was really looking at the different sort of validation steps on how to build a product and get the input from the market, but also how to actually grow the company with external funding through VC funding. So my role has been on the operational side. You know how it starts with ordering coffee and keeping the office running, to raising 10 million, and now trying to close some interesting deals with bigger corporations.
Well, there's a few bits in between there, from going from ordering a coffee to closing a few deals.
Yes. So, but that's as a young company and people within a young company, that's the diversity of the tasks that you're dealing with.
For sure. So what did success look like for you in 2016 when you were sat there ringing up radiologists with Google in front of you? What did you said it was, you kind of wanted to have using computer science for the greater good, for the greater human good, but what did success look like for you guys back then?
So I think what we were looking for back then, not knowing where this could go, right? Because you don't know where it goes when you start a company. What we were looking for was, can we make healthcare cheaper and better at the same time? Because we all know that healthcare costs are increasing and increasing and increasing, and there's basically no way out of that unless you're going to scale down healthcare. So are there ways of better utilizing the current workforce of medical specialists by letting them focus on the more important tasks, the human interaction, the very complex tasks that computers will not be able to do? And can we automate those parts that are simple, tedious, repetitive, and take that work out of their hands, basically? So that's why we expected that we could develop solutions rather quickly to automate these tasks. Little did we know, though, about the complexity of all kinds of medical diagnostics back then. So success was automation of tasks for medical specialists so that they could focus on the complex work and the human being in the whole care process. So yeah, that's where it all started. I think we learned our lessons that it is very, very difficult to just automate tasks. You have to also look at all the work around it. It's not only about diagnostics and interpretation of data, it's also about workflow. It's also about day-to-day work that people are dealing with, where you're trying to fit in with some new technology. And eventually it comes down to changing attitudes and change management as well with these kinds of technologies, because people use the new technology, but their practice in some way will also change as a result of using that new technology. So there was a lot of lessons. There were a lot of lessons learned over the past years, and I think what we've really discovered is that to add value with machine learning, AI, whatever definition you use for it, we start to look more at it like, how can you have an impact with intelligent software on the workflow of doctors and the outcomes for patients? And that's where you can, as we said before, you can go broad with a lot of different applications. But what we've discovered is that you have to go deeper into a care pathway with technology and try to automate as much as possible in that pathway to make the life of clinicians easier and the outcomes for patients better.
I see. So is there a point now when you look back and you think we made the best choice, or are there times when you think, God, wish we'd gone down the autonomous driving route, or wish we'd gone down the robotics route? Do you still think every time you made the right choice now?
Oh no, for sure. It keeps questioning every day. There's like, should I have ever gone into healthcare? Because this space is not technology-wise. It's not the most. Not only it's not just difficult. It's also everything around it. Right? You're dealing with human beings in the end. And human beings, as in you have to have the right accuracy of your solution. Otherwise, the decisions for that person, its treatment or follow-up diagnostics are going to be incorrect. So you're dealing with a lot of complexity around that. But you're also dealing with an industry that basically has no time to innovate. And as in no time, as in they don't have the bandwidth to integrate new solutions. They don't have the time to, try new solutions because they already have very little time to actually focus on the patient. So everything that comes next to it is just an extra burden on their work. So I think the biggest challenge that we've faced is really trying to integrate the solution initially in the workflow and getting it adopted. And then trying to sell it into the industry because, we're still adding an extra cost right now, which we think down the line will have an impact on earlier detection of lung cancer, and the costs thereby will be reduced for the healthcare system. But trying to figure out all those models and how that works in both workflow integration, priorities within hospitals, budgets within hospitals, it was quite a painful process. But I think at this point, and this year is really a shift that we're seeing. The last quarter, we actually got so much demand that we have a whole backlog of tens of hospitals now that want to start using our system.
And that's something that the final question I asked Ben Panter in the last episode was, what has been the effect of COVID on the widespread implementation of AI in healthcare systems across the world? He effectively said that we as an industry have only just caught up with the rest of the world with implementation of cloud systems and different software platforms and such. But notice that you said that you were ready to go in 2019, but then you had a year of, we've got to now create something to implement to have a software platform. Do you think that was one of your biggest challenges? Because you said about validation and implementation of it into the workflow. Was that your biggest challenge at Aidence? Was that it?
Yeah, so integration into the complex IT environment of hospitals is definitely one of the bigger challenges we're facing. And then the other one is convincing the users and eventually the buyers about the business case of this technology. Because I wrote an interesting blog post about that, I think a couple of weeks ago, where we focus on how to build that business case for your hospital. And each country has their own dynamics in reimbursement. Each country has their own stakeholders for who the value actually applies when you implement these solutions. So figuring that out and per country making those cases next to the technical integrations is a huge challenge as well. So our users, they might not even be the commercial or the business case sort of beneficiaries of this technology. But the health system might be. So who's then going to pay for it? Is the hospital going to pay for it? Is the radiology group going to pay for it? Or is the health insurer? Those are the things that we still have to sort of get right. Right now, what you see is that there's a lot of earlier adoption by several hospitals and hospital groups, and they see the benefit themselves. They don't need to be convinced necessarily by the numbers and the research. But this is not something I feel that has been affected by COVID very much.
I see. Okay, so you mentioned about the business case there, though. So how complex? People don't understand the reimbursement models of medical devices across different locations. How complex is the different locations across Europe and America in terms of country by country?
Yeah, so just taking the higher sort of view here, first looking at Europe versus the US, the first interaction that we're seeing is that this technology can be used for different purposes in the different systems. For example, in the US, it's more seen as a tool to find early stage lung cancers and then drive them as quickly through the treatment pathway ensuring that the right steps are taken for the patient and making sure that the patient gets treated early. But at the same time, it's a means for hospitals to drive their revenue. So that's where in the US, of course, the whole healthcare system is completely different than in Europe. So they're looking more at this tool instead of a cost saver as something that can help them acquire more patients. Because more patient, of course, for a hospital is it's a value driver. Now, and there's always a question: is that a good or a bad thing? In the end, for the patient, being detected early in lung cancer is a good thing because that allows a treatment with curative intent, versus late stage detection when a patient basically gets treated for a couple of months and then treatments don't have any effect anymore. But there's a different way of looking at it from an American system where, then again, like I said it before, it's more focused on increasing the amount of early stage patients due to a revenue drive. While in Europe, you're looking at it from a different perspective where everything's focused on cost savings and cost reduction. That's where the cost reduction is actually some of the what I feel more of an element than the actual treatment effect. So they'll first look at, okay, can we actually reduce cost with this? And then the question around the patient comes up. So this is on a higher level when we're talking on sort of like, continental approaches.
Yeah.
But if you're going to look at, for example, the Netherlands, our home market where we started, that's where we have hospitals that have independent radiology groups working in those hospitals, and they basically are the owners of their own profit and loss. So they're looking at purchasing these solutions really as, can we save time with it and can we improve the quality of our service with it? Well, some of the hospitals, they don't have actual budget. So the radiologists themselves decide to purchase this software out of their own pocket because they see that it doesn't only help them read scans faster, but they also recognize that they detect cancers earlier and faster. So for them, it is really an efficiency gain. If you're going to add cost significantly on top of, the current practice, then it's a hard buy for them. But if you can show both an efficiency gain and a quality improvement for earlier stage detection, then the radiologists are even willing to pay out of their own pocket. So that was a surprise to us when we learned that, because what you expect is that they'll go to the insurer or the payer to get the funding. But those payers and the insurers, they are not ready for this yet. So we have started working in the Netherlands with several insurers and have the first discussions on basically building a reimbursement model for this, so that eventually those radiologists that are paying for the solution themselves now can bring this onto the bigger healthcare system.
I see. But when you say the insurers and the payers aren't ready in the Netherlands, why is that? Can they not see the long-term advantage of it, or is there the data not that is the data and the evidence not there yet? What's stopping them?
Yeah, it's a bit of the chicken and the egg. As a startup, you need to be able to, pay your bills as soon as possible. But then how do you do that without getting reimbursed? So you try and push your first solution as quickly as possible, while the reimbursement requires years of evidence to show, hey, this actually has an effect on health economics or large-scale health outcomes. So what we've done is we've sort of built a quick sort of model where we could put the current software in the market against a price that at least we can show some traction, at least that pays our bills. Yeah. But we need to go to a value-based pricing where we can actually show, this software per hospital takes 2 or 3 patients that manually by radiology would simply not be possible. And not be possible because the radiologists aren't doing their work properly. It's because people can't do these measurements and they can't do these detections that computers can do. Right, and therefore, this has a bigger and a better impact on early stage lung cancer detection.
I see. So your first step has been let's go down the efficiency route to sort of have the radiologist buy in, because that's an easy stakeholder or an easier stakeholder for you to get hold of and get the reimbursement, to keep the lights on per se, and to have enough development have enough cash inflow so you can keep development running. But what you're looking for now is, can we create a system where they're actually better at detecting what you're looking for than the radiologists. It's depending on what it is you're looking for. If it's CT scans, if it's MRI data, no matter what it is in your use case, if we're taking this on a sort of a more global view of medical imaging, that's the next step. That's the next use case, the next business case to get the insurers and the payers on side, as it were.
Yes. So because the data that they require takes several years of actual evidence of using that system. So that's where you can't get the data without putting it in the hands of the radiologists, but then you can't give it away for free for 5 years either, because you need to keep the business running, right? So that's the process we are now. We have the adoption, we have scalability in the use of the system, and now we can start demonstrating that health impact. And if you can detect 2 or 3 earlier stage lung cancers per hospital, that would give an instant return of the software development based just on treatment costs or quality of life years gained due to this software. But that's the evidence that we have to start developing now.
I see. And that's all you have you done, like research collaborations with that as well? Have you gone down that route, or are you just going down we're going to put it into radiologist only sort of route in Netherlands? And I don't know if you're in NHS or if you're in America now as well. Is that the route you've gone down?
Yeah, so we actually got awarded funding from the NHS to deploy the software at scale and develop this kind of cost effectiveness evidence over the next 2 to 3 years. And in the Netherlands, that's where we're now having the first discussions with health insurers and the health authorities to see how can we build this evidence so that it can be adopted for standard reimbursement in any CT scan that's being performed.
Sure. Awesome.
And that's similar, some study that we're now discussing in the US with one of the largest health management organizations there.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And then on a sort of, I don't want to put this sort of Europe versus America in your mind, but what do you prefer? Sort of a patient driver model like America, or a cost-effective model in Europe?
So what do you mean with the first one? Because I'm not sure.
So your medical device is being used by the hospitals to gather more patients in because they're more effective. So like you said, it's a patient driver, as it were. That's their first sort of qualification of, is this device something we're going to use? Okay, does it increase the amount of patients we can have? Or in Europe, where it's okay, does this reduce the cost of healthcare? Which one do you prefer, both on maybe a business point of view and maybe on a principled personal point of view?
So of course, from a principle point of view, it's all about the patient, right? Sometimes you tend to forget that when you're looking at pictures and you have an AI going over it, but there's a human being with lung cancer on the other side that we don't know what that personal situation is. So no matter the system, that's why the technology is relevant.
Yeah.
So you see that often in our team discussions when we're looking at scans where we are developing the software. And it's like, hey, this is a real human being. Don't see this as just an image.
Yeah.
So the human factor is something that is independent of the market. So no matter the system, no matter the sort of financial incentives, those are all the same. Eventually, people go into this business to also have an impact a positive impact on humans. Now, from a business perspective, we've only got our experience in Europe so far, and it's quite the challenge to get to this point that we were discussing, right? Developing the evidence for the value-based care, where it's not only about efficiency, but it's really about the impact on patients' lives and therefore the cost that we could potentially save. In the US, the first experience that we have is that it's much easier from their systems to see if this system can be sold and be used by hospitals, because they're looking at it from that patient driver perspective. So from a business perspective, I understand why a lot of companies decide to go to the US first, because the dynamics there are more in favor of getting it reimbursed or paid for.
I see. Okay, so both of them still have the same end in terms of patient care.
Exactly.
But the business model, does it lend itself more to be, probably doesn't though, but does it lend itself to be more cowboyish though in America? I know it's very difficult in healthcare, sort of everyone trying to just get as much money as possible. is the European model a bit more conservative, a bit more social democracy type? That's what I'm trying to get to here, maybe. Versus it's a capitalist model versus a social democratic model potentially.
I think in Europe it depends also which country you're looking at, because there are the similar dynamics as you have in the US, for example. Yeah, and I know it's juicy to have this discussion in the podcast of cowboys versus social capitalism. I would try to stay away from that, because I don't want to, I don't want to sort of put people in that kind of corner. Yes, you can make a lot of money in healthcare if you're a specialist, but people still start, and let's put it like this: most people still start from a perspective that they can have positive impact on human lives.
Yeah.
And that's also why we started to look at this. We didn't start this business because we wanted to be, the people that make a lot of money in this space, because the chances are you're not even going to make it to that point. There's a lot of failure in this space as well. And I think by the approaches that we've taken, by really having close collaborations with clinical specialists on how to develop a product, to validate it, not making big cowboy claims, which have been made in this space a lot over the past years, but just staying real and practical. I think that's how we started in this business. That's how we're now becoming successful as well. I think the whole cowboy approach eventually will just, bite you in the ass eventually. Yeah,
no, for sure. I think when the stuff that you market across and the information you have, you very much have it from a radiologist's perspective of the product. And it's interesting that the first people, when you said, okay, when we sat down, we had Google open, the first people you called were radiologists, to understand what they need, to understand how you can help them, rather than trying to implement something on a market per se. So do you think that was a real fundamental success of your product, in the fact that you were patient-led, but actually you were radiologist-led, you were the user-led?
Yeah, because you've seen a lot of sort of health applications and mobile apps over the past years as well, right? That's one sort of digital health kind of approach what we're seeing.
Yeah.
This is, I think, there's a lot of hype there as well, and what we really try to do is start small, have the discussion with those that understand the clinical challenges, and not just build an application that you could throw out there on an app store and start using, because healthcare is difficult by itself. You need a lot of domain knowledge before you can help solve a problem, being it in the consumer space in health, or in more the clinical specialist space. So I think our approach with having the user drive where our products go is still the one that makes us successful. We've started in imaging, but after deploying the system, we've got all kinds of requests from that same sort of clinician group on how our technology could support other parts of the clinical pathway. And now we're talking about the clinical pathway. That's where the patient comes in as well. It's not just the radiologist or the lung specialist, not only the physicians. But now we're also getting questions, okay, how can we, during this whole process of lung cancer treatment, involve the patient? Can we integrate a patient engagement app? And that's where we now start to see the specialist crossover into sort of the end patient, where it's still relevant to have the main drivers being the clinicians, because they understand all the complexities around lung cancer care. But this whole digital health thing, where we are dealing with apps and mobile phones and that kind of stuff, it now starts to become one in where we started with a clinician focus.
I see. So you said there previously, though, you said you want to do one thing and do it really, really well. So now you're talking about different sort of the whole clinical pathway around lung cancer for patients, but is now where you potentially would branch out? Is it the different areas of the patient pathway, or is it into different areas of medical imaging? Are you going to go around a patient pathway point of view or a medical imaging point of view?
No, we're really going in depth of the pathway. And
Okay,
then
cool.
when you do that well, when you really want to scale it up into other areas, I think you need to build a complete team focusing on that next
So
problem.
I see. So now you've got the diagnostics sort of set up and going, and we know we're going from there within getting the insurance and the payers on side. So you mentioned applications in there and what the patients would use. Talk a little bit more about, if you can, into as much detail as maybe you're allowed to, in terms of what that could look like for the future of not just Aidence, but other medical imaging companies, where they could go next, really.
Yeah, so just without in too much detail about our own case, I think if you look at imaging is often the start of a diagnostic and treatment pathway. So what's behind that imaging part, where you could use software for follow-up checking if a treatment is responding, if a person is responding to treatment, for example, or collecting more data and have AI collect that data and analyze it, so that you can either compare certain patients with others to see what potential outcomes there are relevant to this patient that's similar. You know, that's the kind of stuff that I think adds more value than detecting certain things on an image and drawing a circle around it to say, hey, there's something you should look at. Because if you look further down the pathway, there's a lot of complexities often in collecting more diagnostic information, then applying that diagnostic information to certain clinical guidelines or decision trees. And then those decision trees or guidelines are not always up to date in every hospital. So if those are things that you can, automate with software, that will have a positive impact on the work and the outcomes for the patients. So that's the direction that we're taking, and we more and more believe in that will be the best approach, because it's a thing that we're now writing a blog post about as well. Like, we need more software engineering than AI in healthcare, because AI, as I mentioned several times before in other interviews and in blog posts as well, I don't think AI will take over the work of clinicians in the next 10 to 15, even 25 years. We will be assistive in certain tasks. We will take away the tedious and time-consuming repetitive stuff, but the real complex stuff is still up to the clinicians to make decisions about. But to help them make those decisions, you often need to optimize the workflow, or you need to collect all kinds of data that they now have to pull from different systems and analyze manually. If you can start facilitating that process, you don't even have to do all kinds of sexy stuff with AI. Then it's really about the plumbing of the software that's needed to bring systems together. So I think that's where still a lot of opportunities are available, and that's what we're now looking at as well. So building the technology to pull in all kinds of information, and then eventually on top of that, apply more smart AI solutions.
So it's about now, I don't know if is it maturing is the right word, or just having that level of software scalability for your system and for other companies now to take it on and be user friendly, have automation at the heart, have the correct decisions being made, not only by the system but by the user, be it a radiologist, be it whoever, to enable them to, like you say, work on the most complex diagnostics rather than sort of having that tedious, repetitive task. And that's something that I wanted to ask you. Is it in healthcare? I noticed that there is something of false positives, and that's sort of your accuracy level of you get a small amount of false positive as possible. Is it always the case that you'll always go for false positives rather than obviously false negatives? But also, how close would you dare go to? How small would you dare get that false positive to be sort of zero, so it's fully accurate? And then it sort of goes into the idea of FDA approval and what does that mean for automation and AI? How do you regulate that in the first instance, right?
There's a lot of questions in
There's
that
a few bit there.
sort of sentence.
My
Yeah.
mind was going through there, so apologies for that. So I guess the
Yeah,
question
so
really was about false positives and how far do you dare get to that line?
I think to answer that question, go back to your first question, is like, where are we and where are we in maturity, right? And we all know the hype cycle of technology. It's the Gartner cycle. I think it's Gartner, yeah. So I think we're at the point of the trough of disillusionment now with AI. We're at that bottom part where, like, we've had a lot of hype, a lot of overpromising, and now we're getting to the point of okay, but is this really what AI is capable of today? Yeah, and it has a lot of value already, but it can't deliver, the big promises of replacing humans.
Yeah.
But then what can it deliver is indeed taking away repetitive tasks. You can take away those repetitive tasks with a highly accurate AI. And there have been all kinds of measures by different companies, both small legacy companies and startups, about how accurate their solutions are. Still, there's a lot of cowboying in this space. I think the certification doesn't necessarily say anything about the accuracy of a solution. So there's a lot of claims still, even with certification, or just certification that's not complete, and the software still sold with certain claims that have not been certified, that we see. But what we're trying to do constantly is improve the accuracy of the solution. However, it doesn't need to be perfect in the current situation. It needs to be at least as good or even better than the human in this case. And the best solution is when you can combine the human and the AI together to get sort of the sum of both, where you have a much higher accuracy and a more efficient process.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we are aiming for right now. So we already put that system into clinical practice, and we think it's more accurate. It's not only confirmed by ourselves, but it's confirmed on a day-to-day basis by users. We're getting quotes, calls, emails from radiologists saying, hey, you saved my ass here because I did not see this cancer. Or another one saying, hey, I did see that spot, but I couldn't measure it the way you did. And I didn't see it as a growing nodule. But then when we checked it based on your information, it showed that this indeed was a growing lung cancer. So everything there is about improving that false positive rate. So bringing down the false positives, increasing the sensitivity of a solution so that we don't miss any potential lung cancers, but also that we don't create too many, flags of things that aren't lung cancer, because that would always frustrate the radiologist or the clinicians as well.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line, basically. You can make these systems more accurate, but at the same time, if you don't train them well, you can create too many false alarms. So, and with certification, it's really about still the study where you have to demonstrate how good a radiologist or a clinician is with your AI, and they don't expect you to demonstrate a standalone system yet in something as complex as our field.
Yeah. So that's bad. So it's always a debate and something that I grapple with as well is how far can we go, and also what's underpinning it? How do you regulate these devices? And it kind of goes back to the first question of what does success actually look like? And it's very much seems a case that you feel success is assistive rather than replacement of it. And that's where, once you understand that, you can really take the technology to its most powerful entity, because you're not trying to replace anybody. You're not trying to do something that it can't really do. And once we understand that, we can really make it as powerful as possible. But I've had an absolutely fascinating time picking your brain and talking to you, Jeroen, about the business case of AI in healthcare and what you guys are doing and the challenges you found in dealing with both the European market and the American market. I noticed you mentioned a few times there some blog posts. So just for anyone listening to this who would like to find out more, where can they find your blog posts?
Just on our company website, aidence.com. That's where we have in the menu bar you can find articles, and that's where you can find the latest on these sort of thought pieces. And that's where I regularly rewrite more about, indeed, as you described, the business case adoption, because there's a lot of hype on the AI part, but the other part of the sort of the business and the other part of the healthcare spectrum need to be covered for these kinds of technology to be adopted. So that's where you can, at aidence.com, that's where you can find all these pieces.
Awesome, brilliant. Thank you very much. And I know we haven't gotten into as much detail probably in that area as possible. I can urge people to go and read those articles. So there is some really good piece of information there. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity to come on your show, and looking forward to hear more people. If there are any questions, don't feel afraid to reach out.
100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.